Kwekwe, welcome to Indigital Insights. My name is Monique Manach. Monique Manach Indigenous, Kitikanik I'm from the Algonquins of Barrier Lake, and today we get the opportunity to speak and work with Ovi Mailhot, a Stolo Nation artist from Seabird Island in British Columbia, and he's now living in Indiana. So we're going to find out about his work and how he does it and some of the tools he uses. So Ovi, welcome. Pajasha, Mino Pajasha. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome for being here. And I'll turn it right over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I've been excited for this, anticipating this introduction, my friends. Ace Whale with Pelch Tel Squee. My name is OV, and I am a Coast Salish graphic artist and designer, originally from Seabird Island, British Columbia on the West Coast, maybe about 2 hours east of Vancouver. But for the past 4 years, I've been living in the United States. Right now, I'm in Lafayette, Indiana, the Midwest. I am so far from my home, but I practice an art style that is from my territory, from my roots, from my ancestors. It's an art style that has been around for thousands of years, and this style of art that I'm going to be sharing about today is Coast Salish art. Now, I've been practicing this art style for about 9 years through the form of graphic art and design. That is the medium that I chose. And I'm just really happy to be here today and share some of what I've picked up along the way about this particular art style. Now, before 9 years ago, I used to just do pencil and paper, and I never took being an artist that seriously. But I started to see opportunities there, and I wanted to learn more about my culture and my roots. And I chose the medium of graphic art to express myself as an artist and to tell, the story of who I am and my culture and my tradition. Like, for example, if you're not familiar with what a graphic artist does, it just means I do all my artwork on my computer. For example, I have a drawing tablet here connected to my computer. Instead of paper and pencil, I've got my stylus pen, and I use programs such as Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator to create my designs. Now, why did I choose graphic art as my medium? I just thought it was really exciting and refreshing and opened up a lot of different opportunities for me to experiment and explore. It also allowed me to put my artwork on pretty much anything that I want. So in the past 9 years, I've been trying to think of different ways to share the beauty of Coast Salish art and who I am as an artist. So in the past 9 years, I've been working with multiple apparel companies. I've launched my own brand, Salish Sun Design. I have my own merchandise. I also do logo designs for a lot of organizations and schools. And I do these workshops through a nonprofit organization called Connected North, which allows me to do these workshops, Coast Salish art demonstrations, to schools all across Canada. And that's something that has really impacted my life as an artist and has been really fulfilling and rewarding for me as well to share, the different things that I've learned about this particular art style. I can give you a little bit of a show and tell before we get started as well. So I've got some of the merchandise that I've created over the years. This one right here, for example, is one of my favorites. A very good example of my work. You can see I love working with patterns. I love a lot of color and vibrancy. And through this session, you're going to see that I get inspired by so many different sources. I get inspired by things that I see, things that I enjoy, sometimes things that I just think are cool. This design right here, a backpack design that I created for a company in Seattle. I did many designs for this company, but I hung on to this one because it's one of my absolute favorites. Is inspired from a childhood memory. So living on Seabird Island, anytime we had to go into town, we had to cross over the Fraser River on a bridge. One of my favorite memories in my childhood, going into town with my mother and seeing the eagles hunting the salmon in the river during a sunset. And that's what this design represents, a very fond memory of mine. Now, because I do graphic art, if I wanted to, I could take that same design, I could throw it on a custom pair of kicks. That's the same eagle pattern right there that I put on a pair of shoes for myself. I also did some shoe designs for a company in Alberta, but these are my personal kicks. I take these out a lot, and that's what I love. I love being able to wear my artwork and see other people wear my artwork as well. This one right here, very proud about this one. So my brand, Salish Sun, recently collaborated with one of the largest Indigenous owned apparel brands in the United States called The Natives. And we came up with some cool merchandise like this. This is a wolf design, which is actually a tessellation, similar to a yin yang. You'll see a black wolf on top, connected to a white wolf underneath. And there's even a wolf underneath the bill. This is like my favorite lid right now. I take this out a lot. And I'm very proud about that because that just showed the growth of my own brand as well. Even my coffee cup. So designers definitely live off of coffee. And I love having my artwork on my coffee cup. This is Skaywalks, the Raven. Once again, very colorful. And you can see the patterns I like to use on the top and bottom as well. Shameless plug for my work. Last year, I was featured on Amazon Canada on the front page. It blew my mind. And if you were to type my name on Amazon now, you're probably going to see some cool merchandise like this that I did with Connected North. Even smaller projects. I'm really into typography. I love doing book covers, flyers, posters, and stuff like that. This is a book cover that I did for an Indigenous author in Toronto. And this author asked for a Whiskey Jack bird. And this is my version of a Whiskey Jack in a Coast Salish style. Even smaller projects, you name it, I'm trying to put my artwork on it. So here's some sticker designs that I did for a company in Alaska. Once again, this is Stakaya, the wolf, probably one of my favorites to draw. Wallace, the whale, very minimal in design, and that's the style of art that I really appreciate. And it is all self-taught. I didn't have a teacher to show me how to do Coast Salish art. I kind of had to figure that out on my own, along with inspiration from other artists I looked towards that pointed me in the right direction. Same thing with graphic art. So graphic art is self-taught as well. I didn't take any courses for that. Maybe I'll explain a bit about how I got into that as well. But at this point, I'm going to share with you exactly how I learned how to do Coast Salish art. And then I'm going to share examples of my work and the inspiration behind it. And then we're going to finish things off with a fun little drawing exercise that you can follow along with standard paper and pencil. So I'm about to share my screen. I'm just going to get right into it. So clicking on share screen, I'm going to click the window, and we're going to go into Photoshop, which is pretty much where I do a lot of my graphic art and design. Also use Adobe Illustrator. And what you should be seeing first is a very old example of Coast Salish art. So this right here is what I like to call ancestral designs. These are designs from my ancestors, or some would call artifacts. And this right here is a tool that my ancestors used called a spindle whorl. And a spindle whorl was used for textiles, to create blankets, to create fishnets, to create their clothing. And on this part of the tool, that's where my ancestors would carve out their art and tell their stories. And I would find images of these looking through museum archives online. Any book about Coast Salish art and culture, I've probably read it. I was very passionate about wanting to learn more about this art style and the stories connected to it. And this is one of my favorite designs, actually. So this is well over 100 years old, and this spindle whorl is showing a thunderbird, and the thunderbird is carrying a killer whale in its talons down below. There's lots of stories connected to these designs, stories that I'm still learning to this day. And thunderbird is one of my favorite creatures. What's interesting about thunderbird, it is not just a creature or story from the West Coast where I'm from. Many Indigenous nations throughout Canada, the United States, even South America have very ancient stories about this creature. And what I was taught and what I learned in the past 9 years is that thunderbirds ruled the skies. Thunderbirds were big enough to hunt killer whales, sometimes even carry off a human. I've learned that thunderbirds on the West Coast lived in the mountains and watched over the land and the people. I've read stories that thunderbirds could create storms by flapping its wings and shot lightning from its eyes. Lots of cool stories connected to these designs. And anytime I got my hands on these images of these spindle whorls, I just practiced drawing them just to get an idea of how my ancestors created these designs. And I love the simplicity of this design. It's very minimal. There's not a lot of detail. And that's a style of art that I really appreciate. I'll show you one more example of a spindle whorl. It's a little bit different. But once again, another thunderbird. So as I was learning Coast Salish art, a lot of the time I spent practicing drawing thunderbird designs. So this time, a little bit different, but once again, I see a thunderbird, and this one is very balanced, very symmetrical. I see a thunderbird on the left, and in reflection, I see a thunderbird on the right. I see a human depicted in the middle, and I even see human faces within the body of the thunderbird. Now, I've read stories that thunderbirds could transform and take different shapes. And I believe in this design that the thunderbird is transforming into its human form. So very cool design. I love the balance. I love the symmetry. It's a little bit more detailed than this one right here, but those two are probably two of my favorites. Now, what I picked up when looking at these ancestral designs is that, yes, there's a lot of stories connected to it, but as I was practicing drawing them, I kept seeing the same shapes over and over again. And I realized that my ancestors used 3 particular shapes for this art style. There are different Indigenous art styles on the West Coast, but the one way to pinpoint that it's Coast Salish art is by these 3 shapes used in the designs. I'm probably going to say the name of these shapes a lot as I use them in all of my designs, and they're very simple shapes. So the first shape of Coast Salish art is a circle shape, a circle or an oval shape. I can see a circle for the eye of the thunderbird. I can see a circle in the middle of the spindle whorl, and I can see a small circle for the eye of the killer whale. Second shape that we use in Coast Salish art almost looks like the letter C. We call it a crescent shape. And I see multiple crescent shapes in the body of this thunderbird. I see small crescent shapes along the top wing. And I actually see 1, 2, 3 crescent shapes around the killer whale's eye. Last but not least, a lot of people forget the name of this one, probably because that has an unusual name. We call this shape a trigon. So trigon, very similar to a triangle, but a triangle is straight like a ruler. The shape that we use has nice curve to it. So I see a trigon shape on top of the thunderbird's head, which actually represents the top plumage feather of a thunderbird. Or I've also read that it represents the top horn of a thunderbird. I also see small trigon shapes within the wing of this thunderbird, the tail feathers, and small trigon shapes throughout the body of this killer whale. Now, I shared with you that my backpack design was inspired from a childhood memory of mine. These shapes that are used in Coast Salish art also have inspiration. So my ancestors were inspired by nature and their surroundings to create this art form so many years ago. I have a few examples of that, such as this photograph of a cedar bough, which is still a plant medicine that our people use today. In this image of a cedar bough, I can see one of those trigon shapes. So as I dim this out, you'll get a visual example of what I'm talking about. So as I'm dimming that out, you can see one of those trigon shapes, almost as if it fits within the tip of the cedar bough. And that's kind of what Coast Salish art is about. You create the outline of your animal, or whatever creature you're designing, and then you fit these 3 shapes into place. Different examples, finding these shapes in nature. You can find a circle shape in the sun. A bird's nest is made within a circle. You can find the crescent shape in the moon. You can find trigon shapes in the mountains, the trees, the leaves, or even the waves in the water. Maybe I'll share one more example, finding these shapes in nature. So growing up along the West Coast, very familiar with salmon. Salmon is my favorite food to eat, whether it's smoked, wind-dried, fried. I could eat salmon all day long. But I realized that you can find all three shapes within the body of a salmon. A circle shape for the eye, crescent shape for the gills or even the scales, and you can find a trigon shape in the fins as well. So lots of different ways of finding these shapes within nature. But in this presentation, I really wanted to share that I learned how to do this art style from these ancestral designs. I simply wanted to learn more about my background and my roots. I knew my ancestors have this really cool art style, and I wanted to learn more and more about it. There's so many stories that are connected to these designs, stories that I'm still learning about. I've learned that my ancestors used three shapes and that these shapes were inspired by nature. So I put in a lot of practice drawing these designs, learning about the shapes, learning about the stories. Then I started to create my own designs in a Coast Salish style. So this is my version of a Thunderbird, very much how like my ancestors would design a Thunderbird. But I like adding my own expression. I like adding my own style to it as well. So you can see there's a circle surrounding my Thunderbird, and that's inspired from the circular tools, the spindle whorls that my ancestors used. I have a lightning effect in the background, and that's inspired from the traditional stories that I've learned that Thunderbirds could create storms. Now, last year, I actually did this design for Meta. And last year, I took a 6-week course with Meta in learning how to do augmented reality with an Indigenous team of artists, and we were called Spark Indigenous. Now, I can create very cool effects for this design, and I did that. So, for example, I have a QR code on the finished design, and if a person were to hold their phone to this design, you would see an animation effect where the rings start to pop out and start to rotate. So just adding a new kind of realm for me to explore with my artwork and expression. And that's something that I'm very excited about. There's so many things that, so many different ways you can experiment in creation when it comes to AR and graphic art for that matter. But yeah, I'm very excited about that. I'm very much inspired by nature, just like my ancestors. So you're going to see me doing a lot of animal designs, especially birds and, butterflies are one of my favorites. I love the balance and the symmetry when it comes to a butterfly design. So you'll see me doing a lot of butterfly designs, but I'm also experimenting. You can see I'm experimenting with these geometric shapes right here that shows the flight of the butterfly. And my designs are very minimal, just like some of those ancestral designs, such as that spindle whorl that I shared with you. So I love a nice clean design. It's not too often that I add a lot of detail in my designs. I just feel like less is more. But that's, excuse me, that's just my preference. I also get inspired by students. So I've did over, I think I'm at 580 of these Coast Salish art sessions that I've did with schools across Canada through Connected North. And that's so rewarding for me as an artist, especially when I get to connect with other Indigenous students, especially from remote communities such as schools in Nunavut. So I remember doing a session with these students up north, and I asked these students which animals represent your territory. Represent your territory the best. And one of the students told me an Arctic fox. And we definitely don't have Arctic fox where I'm from. And that really inspired me in wanting to create an Arctic fox in a Coast Salish style. So I created this playful fox design jumping through the snow underneath the northern lights. And once again, very simple in design, not a lot of detail. I like the simplicity. It's simple, but also elegant and bold as well. Stakaya, the wolf. I hold a spiritual connection to Stakaya. So you're definitely going to see me doing a lot of wolf designs. It's definitely my favorite. I've probably did over 100 wolf designs and I never get tired of it. It is my absolute favorite to draw and design. So I created a very simple wolf design. I wanted it to be kind of perched up and ready to howl at the moon during a storm. So I used these very simple lightning bolts to represent the storm. Once again, these simple geometric lines to represent the rain. And sometimes I like my designs to be very colorful. And then depending on my mood, sometimes I'll just use maybe 1 or 2, 3 different colors. But yeah, sometimes I get very colorful in my designs. Killer whale. So whale is Qualis in my language. I love doing killer whale designs. Very iconic to the Pacific Northwest and also a symbol for family. Because whenever killer whales travel in the ocean, they're always together in a pod as a family. And these days, when I create a killer whale design, I'm thinking about my family and relatives back home in British Columbia. And I created this one. I titled this Diving In. And I created this design maybe about 4 or 5 years ago when I made the transition into becoming a full-time artist and designer. I felt like I was just diving right into my career, not really knowing what type of future was ahead after that. So far, so good. And yeah, this is a design that kind of was at a very good period in my life when I wanted to be a full-time artist and designer. And yeah, killer whales, always one of my favorites to design. This design I'm very proud of. It's very balanced. It's also very intricate. And I have a sun face in the middle. And sun to me represents growth and healing. And I also have 4 eagle heads surrounding the sun. Once again, a lot of balance and symmetry to this design. And the number 4, you'll see that maybe often in my designs, maybe even unintentionally. But 4 is a very sacred number, not just for our people on the West Coast and our culture, but probably a lot of Indigenous nations, because we pray to the ancestors of the 4 directions. We use 4 plant medicines: sage, sweetgrass, tobacco, and cedar. There's 4 colors within the medicine wheel as well. So within my designs, you're going to see the number 4 popping up a lot probably. I also chose eagle because eagle I see eagle as a messenger. Anytime we do our prayers and ceremony, our prayers go up to the eagle because the eagle is the one creature that flies highest, closest to the creator. So it brings our prayers up to the creator, and in return, we receive the blessings. So you're going to see me doing a lot of eagle designs as well. Definitely one of my favorite creatures to design. I love doing bird designs. Bird designs are some of my favorites. I've did so many different types of bird designs. And this is my version of a blue heron in a Coast Salish style. So living along the Fraser River, if you were lucky enough, you might be able to spot a blue heron fishing in the water. And I spent a majority of my life growing up along the Fraser River, and I've only seen a blue heron once, but it's always going to be something that's forever locked in my memory. And that inspired me to create this blue heron design in a Coast Salish style. Definitely one of my favorite designs. I actually have this as a print and hung up in my bedroom. And yeah, I just enjoy the way this one turned out. And now you're going to see a couple of my fun designs. So I'm not just inspired by nature. I love watching a lot of different movies. I like playing video games. I like watching anime. I'm into comic book stuff. So I like to express that in my artwork as well. And I do a lot of sessions with youth. And Anime is super popular right now, and it's a great way for me to get the students engaged and to kind of express that that kind of nerdy side to myself. And I love the art style of anime. And there was one that I was watching, a very popular anime. One of the characters wore a cool fox mask. Now, on the West Coast, we have a lot of very cool traditional masks. So I appreciate a good mask design when I see one. And when I saw that fox mask, that inspired me in wanting to come to my computer and recreate that mask, but in a Coast Salish style. Even in this design, you'll see those same three shapes that my ancestors used. The circle shape for the eye, crescent shape on the forehead. You can see the trigon shape in the ears, on the cheek, and on the chin as well. And these are the type of designs that I create in my free time, which I don't really have a lot of these days. I'm a very busy artist, thankfully, but I love to have fun with my artwork. I like to show everyone, the type of things that I'm interested in, the type of things that I really nerd out on, I guess, such as this Batman design. So I've always been into comic books. Honestly, comic books are probably how I got interested in art in the first place. I was always that kid in the back of the class that was not really paying attention to the teacher as much. And I was always drawing and doodling and drawing superheroes like Batman, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. And yeah, the artwork that was in comic books, I just thought it was amazing. And that's probably how I got interested in art so many years ago. Actually, 9 years ago, creating designs like this Batman emblem, is kind of how I caught my break as an artist. There wasn't too many Indigenous artists that were experimenting with, traditional elements and combining that with pop culture emblems and icons. So I would say creating designs like this 9 years ago is definitely how I caught a lot of people's attention and kind of drove me into wanting to pursue a career in graphic art and design in the first place. So at this point, now you have an idea of the type of work that I do. I get inspired by so many different things. I get inspired by the traditional stories and teachings of my ancestors. I get inspired by nature, just like my ancestors. I get inspired by doing these sessions with so many students across Canada. I get inspired by family as well. I get inspired by movies, video games, anime, and all that cool stuff too. So this session is not just about Coast Salish art. I like to share with everyone that I simply got curious about my roots 9 years ago. I wanted to learn more about my ancestors and my background. And I found out that my ancestors have this really amazing art style. And I just became so passionate about it that I wanted to learn more. And I found it was a great way for me to express myself and tell the story of who I am, utilizing those three traditional elements, and combining that with things that I really enjoy and kind of make me the person who I am today. So I'm hoping that that might get, students inspired. Maybe they'll want to learn more about their ancestors and their background. They might find that their ancestors have a really cool art style. They'll want to learn more about it, and they might end up creating something that no one's ever saw before as well. So at this point, you have an idea of the type of work that I'm going to do. Now I will shift into the drawing portion of this session. So I think right now, maybe I'll take a break to see how you're feeling about this session.
This is absolutely amazing. It's
Oh, good.
so fantastic. I'm
I wanted to take a break in case you're like, maybe I want to add something in here or anything like that.
Well, I love how you were explaining the three shapes of the Coast Salish art form, and it never. I guess it never really occurred to me to really look into it that deeply and realize that the different styles of the different nations have these different shapes embedded in them.
Yeah. Uh, there's certain things that I'm learning about the shapes, and as we start drawing, I'm going to start saying how my ancestors used these shapes and the designs and the symbolism and meaning behind these shapes as well.
It makes me want to look at my own community and at the drawings. We do birch bark drawings on birch bark. We use the birch bark quite a bit, and they don't scrape the image into the birch bark. They scrape away everything else, and it leaves the image of a moose or a beaver or the animals that are in our environment. And I wondered, are there shapes that go? How do they do that? How do how what shapes are involved in that? What because I look at a piece and right away I know if it's Algonquin. I can just feel it. As opposed to being Ojibwe or Chippewa or some other Anishinaabe. And I know the Mi'kmaq have definite stylized elements to their art as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's so unique, and it's cool to share what I know about these shapes and how they were used, because a lot of people, when they see it, it's just kind of an aesthetic. Like, they can see the differences between the art styles, but they don't know, like, was there a purpose for these shapes, or is there a story behind these shapes as well? So it's cool for me to be in a position where I can share some of the things that I know.
So how did you determine that? How did you did you just notice it and start exploring that?
No, there's a lot of books about Coast Salish art. There's a lot of artists that have been doing this for a long time, that I've kind of picked up information along the way. And Coast Salish territory covers a lot of ground. It covers southern British Columbia, Vancouver Island, stretches into Washington State, and even a bit of Oregon. And there's so many tribes and nations within that territory, and each nation, like, could have their own meaning and own style of Coast Salish art. So I've been picking up different things along the way and trying to compile it together, um, so I'll be kind of more well-rounded in what I've learned about Coast Salish art. So the things that I'm sharing are, from other artists and books that I've picked up, and just things that I've learned from. Because I didn't have it wasn't so accessible for me to reach out and find a teacher that does traditional Coast Salish art. And that's simply through colonization and residential schools. Like, our art style was almost wiped out. And it was only from, like, a handful of artists in the late 70s and 80s that revitalized Coast Salish art. And these are artists that I really got inspired from, like Susan Point. She is one of my absolute favorite artists that does the Coast Salish style. Yeah.
Wow. Were there were you able to did you have access to elders or other people in your family who were able to tell you some of these stories? Maybe not the art itself, but the stories.
So some of the stories, like, that I've learned about Thunderbird, are stories that have been, retained from my childhood. Things that I've learned in school from ancestors, stories that have been passed down from my mother and my grandmother. So everything that I share are kind of bits and pieces from, my childhood, and, elders and, grandmothers that I've learned from, but also through books that I've read, other Coast Salish artists that I've connected with, and other Coast Salish artists that, I've been inspired from. So a little bit of everything, a little bit of everything.
What made you go digital?
So what made me go digital? I never thought I'd be an artist. I came from a very creative family, though. My father was a painter. My mother was a writer. My brother was interested in art. Both my sisters are writers. My younger sister is a New York Times best-selling author. So I come from a really creative family, and I just knew that I had a lot of creative energy. I just didn't know what type of medium I wanted to tap into. So there was a time in my life where I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. So I spent a lot of time self-teaching how to play guitar until I realized how hard it was. I also wanted to get into culinary arts, utilizing our traditional, plants and, like salmon and stuff. I really wanted to get into that. But then I also started to just sketch, pencil and paper. And I didn't really think my artwork was that good 9 or 10 years ago. Thought it was terrible, honestly. And I was very self-conscious about sharing my work. But there was one design in particular that I thought turned out not too bad. And I decided to share it on my social media. And I probably only got maybe like 10 likes or something like that. But I thought it was so cool that there was people out there that liked my drawing. But the very next day, that's when a company saw my drawing because I used a hashtag Coast Salish, and they reached out to me and they were like, "We really love your drawing. Would you be interested in possibly doing a few designs with our brand?" And that blew my mind. I was like, "No way." I was like, I jumped on that opportunity, but they also asked me, "Do you know how to digitalize your drawing? Do you know how to vector your drawing?" And I didn't even know what the word vector meant at the time. So I did a little bit of research. I went to Walmart. I got one of these drawing tablets, just like you see here, and it came with a free software program for art on your computer. I didn't have a teacher. I installed the program on my computer, but I didn't know what to do next. So I went to YouTube. I typed in the name of the program, and sure enough, 1,000 tutorials popped up for this program. And I just did maybe a tutorial or two a day. And I became so excited about wanting to learn more and more because there were so many different doors of creativity that have just opened up to me through the realm of graphic art. And yeah, I haven't turned back since.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
How do you when you're working with a company, then um, whatever you create, they retain ownership of it. Is that right?
Oh, maybe earlier in my career, but since since I've definitely grown as an artist, I'm not just an emerging artist anymore. I'm an established artist. I've learned the value of my work, and I'm very careful who I approach to collaborate with, who I approach to share who I am as an artist, because it's something I hold very sacred. So it kind of depends. I love to obtain the rights to my own work. I'm very careful about that. And that's also been a unique learning experience for me along the way because I've worked with so many different companies and organizations that has all just been a learning process for me as well as an artist.
So now you retain the ownership of your work.
Through a lot of my contracts, yes, yes, I'm very, very careful about that. Yeah.
Oh, it's a good idea. It's something that is so important for all of our artists to learn.
Yeah, and knowing the value of your work, that's something that I had to learn along the way. Like I started out doing my first design gig was doing a flyer for a market, and it was simply out of curiosity. I received their junk mail and I looked at their flyer and I was like, "Oh, this is a terrible design." So on the weekend for fun, I redesigned their flyer and I sent it to them. They're like, "Whoa, this is amazing. Would you be able to do our flyer for the next couple weeks? We can't pay you right now, but we can turn you on to someone that needs a logo design after you complete this project." And my first project was a logo design. I can't even remember what it was, but I maybe did it for $200 at the time. And even that blew my mind. I was like, no way, someone's going to pay me $200 to do this drawing for them. And that's how it all started for me. And I continued to grow and expand my business. I set up a business plan for myself, which direction I wanted to take my work. And it became a constant learning experience for me and building up my clientele to the point where I just recently asked for, $20,000 for my next project. So in the past 9 years, it's crazy how much growth has been in my career as a graphic artist and designer, but it's all been a learning process on my own. So I love being able to share that part of my story because that's not something that a lot of, Indigenous designers talk about or have much knowledge. So yeah, I like sharing about that as well. Knowing the value of your work is key. That's the key part. And it took me a while to kind of figure that out, but now I do.
That's excellent. Yeah, there's so many. And what would you say to these young artists who are coming up? You said you did your own business plan and you've done research and you went to YouTube. If these, with these young people coming up, what steps would you recommend they take?
Um, to know the value in your work, I mean, that's been key for me. And if you really want to turn your artwork into a career for yourself, that's going to take a lot of passion. That's going to take a lot of determination and also time. So you have to, like, I sacrificed a lot of my weekends and social life because I was constantly working a full time job and just trying to do art and design on the weekends as well. And I just knew at that time that I could turn this into a career for myself eventually. And I was just really determined to make that happen. And I wanted to learn more about Coast Salish art. I wanted to learn more about graphic art and design. And through the days and weeks, I just spent a lot of time practicing and honing my skills and learning as much as I can about Coast Salish art and culture. And all that hard work pays off. So the best advice I can offer, approach your work with a pure heart and approach it with good energy. And the more good energy that you put into your work, the more good vibes that you're going to get back. Good things are eventually going to come back to you if you're putting in that work. I think we can. I'll get right into the drawing portion of this session. Yeah. All right. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and then we're going to go right back into Photoshop. So typically, I don't like to make anyone draw what I want to draw. So I tend to have a lot of options, and we usually take a vote on what we're going to draw. But in this case, unfortunately, I'm going to make you draw what I feel like drawing today. So this one, I chose a very popular one. So this is pesca, and pesca means hummingbird in my language. By the way, I'm still learning my language, Halkamalum. I can say some animal names. I can say a few sentences, but I still have a long way to go. That's something that I'm also kind of determined and passionate about, learning the language as well. And pesca is one of my favorite birds. This design, a lot of students love doing this design, probably because it's easy to follow along and it can be very colorful should you decide to color this design after. Once again, simple design, but also elegant and bold. And hummingbird, definitely one of my favorite birds. Hummingbird is a symbol for springtime because hummingbirds come around during mid-spring and late spring. Here in Indiana, I haven't seen the hummingbird yet, so I'm hopefully going to see some hummingbirds. I need to put a feeder out. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how to draw this hummingbird design. I just want you to try your best, follow along. Everything takes practice, so don't get too worried about how perfect it looks. But before I start drawing the hummingbird, I'm going to show you a couple different ways to draw these shapes as well. Because what I love about Coast Salish art is that we use 3 simple shapes, but there's a lot of ways to draw these shapes. So your design can look a little different each and every time. You don't have to draw this part if you don't want to, but I'm going to show you a couple different ways how to draw, for example, a trigon shape. So I'll put that in the top corner, and I'll have the hummingbird in the middle probably. So this is my go-to trigon shape. Almost like I'm drawing a triangle, but instead of straight lines, you can see I've got some curve to this shape. I use that shape a lot. That's why I call it my go-to trigon. Now, I'm going to show you a different way how to draw this shape. So instead of the lines curving inwards, I'm going to draw a trigon where the lines curve outwards. Now, You can also turn these shapes at any direction that you want, as long as you think it fits inside of your design and looks good. Now here's a totally different looking trigon. I could make one side longer than the other if I wanted to. I can make the top part curve to the left or curve to the right. But you can see it still has 3 points like the one above it. It's got a lot more curve to it. What about the crescent shape? So here is a crescent shape that I will probably use in this hummingbird design eventually. And it is a nice round crescent, almost like I'm drawing the letter C with some pointy edges on it. So that's a good crescent. I use that one a lot. It takes up, I often put this in the round part of the animal's body, or if I want this crescent to take up a lot of space. Now, maybe I will draw a skinny crescent. So here's a skinny crescent. I'll even turn it at an angle simply because I can. And this is kind of a stretched out crescent, much skinnier. That's just a variation of that shape. Also, if you want, you have the option of connecting these shapes together. So for example, I'm going to draw a trigon shape connected to this crescent, just like this. So you have the option to do that. I don't really use that shape a lot in my designs, but I know it's always there for me if I wanted to. And here's an example of that. When I go back to the designs from my ancestors, you can see in the killer whale, that's that shape right there. There's the trigon shape. And there's that stretched out crescent going over it. So all of these shapes that I'm showing you are taken directly from these ancestral designs. So on to the hummingbird. So my approach to most of my animal designs, it's kind of been my routine for the past 9 years. I like to draw the eye or the eyes first, and then I draw the head shape, and then I draw the body shape. Your hummingbird can be a small little bird, or it can take up the entire page. That's up to you. Your paper can be landscape, or it can be portrait up and down. That's up to you as well. Here's what I want you to do to start your hummingbird design. We're going to start with the eye. So I want you to draw kind of a small circle. It's not really in the center, but off to the side a little bit. And yeah, it can be an oval shape as well. You don't even have to draw a perfect circle. It's very hard to do that, honestly. If you want to draw an oval shape, that works too. Just like how there's a lot of ways to draw the shapes, there's actually a lot of ways to draw an eye in Coast Salish art. And whenever I'm unsure, I'm always going to go back to how did my ancestors design an eye? And here's 2 great examples. When I look at the thunderbird, I see the circle shape, and then I see one of those pointy trigon shapes to the left of the circle. I see a pointy trigon shape to the right of the circle, kind of connected to each other. That's one way you can draw your hummingbird eye. Or you can even draw it easier, such as the whale down below. A small circle, and to the left of it, a crescent shape. To the right of it, a crescent shape. And if you're feeling like it, you can even add a third crescent shape followed by a trigon shape. Lots of options here. So how do I want to draw my hummingbird? I originally used a trigon shape. So today, I'm going to go with the crescent shape. Or you can mix and match. You can have a crescent on one side and a trigon on the other as well. My hummingbird is going to have its head tilted towards the sky a little bit. That's my shapes are at a bit of an angle right now. So I'm going to put another crescent, maybe just to the top right of this circle a bit, right about there. There's an eye in Coast Salish art. Very easy, did not do anything tricky. Maybe at the top of the page, I'll show you the other way to draw an eye. So there would be a circle, and instead of crescent, I can use a trigon shape. So there's a trigon shape on one side, and a trigon shape on the opposite side. Or you can have a little bit of space in between the shapes, like what I did with this hummingbird design. There's space, they're not connected to each other. Sometimes, to represent the pupil of an eye, you can add a little circle inside of it. Or here's what I like to do sometimes. I like to add a little U-shaped crescent inside of an eye if I want it to represent the pupil. For my hummingbird, I'm just going to leave it blank. That's what I often do anyway. So moving along, I've got the eye of the hummingbird. Now I'm going to move on to the shape of the head. Best way for me to describe this part, it's going to be like you're drawing the tip of your thumb going around the eye. And I'll show you. I'm going to draw a little thumb shape going around the eye, just like that. That's the head of my hummingbird. Just a little thumb shape. Then I'm going to move on to its most distinct feature. A hummingbird does not have a beak like an eagle. It does not have a beak like a raven. It's got a very kind of long, skinny beak. It doesn't have to be too long. Here's what mine's going to look like coming from the nose. It's going to be like I'm drawing the tip of a spear or a needle point. It's getting pointier at the end, just like that. You can have a straight beak. You can have a short beak. You can have a long beak. That is up to you. Fun fact for today, out of all the species of bird in the world, the hummingbird is the one bird that can fly in all directions. Hummingbird can fly backwards. Hummingbird can fly upside down. So I believe that the creator gifted this bird with that ability. Makes it a very special, unique bird. And one of my favorites. Okay, so we're making good progress here. We have an eye. We've got a head shape. Now I have a beak. Now I'm going to move on to the shape of hummingbird's body. And I'm going to give hummingbird a round little chest. And then I'm going to curve a line towards where I want the tail to be. I'll show you, and it'll make sense. Right from the neck, I'm going to do a round little bump for the chest, coming out like that. Now I'm starting to curve a line towards the left. And I want the tail to be maybe right about here. So I just basically did a curved line from the neck going down towards the left. I'm keeping in mind hummingbird is a small little bird. That's why I did not make my line go too far down my page. Unless you want a long hummingbird, that's up to you. That might look cool. I say go for it. Now I want my hummingbird to have a pointy shaped tail. I want a pointy shaped tail for this bird. So here's how I do that. Right from that last line, I'm going to make a little line that curves up just a bit, maybe like right there. So now my hummingbird has a pointy shaped tail. And I did that, excuse me, I did that for a reason. Remember that photo that I showed you of the cedar bough and how that trigon fit inside of the cedar bough? That's what I want to do with this tail. I want to draw a trigon shape that looks like it's going to fit inside of this tail. Now, 9 years ago, I knew that my ancestors used 3 shapes, but at that time, I didn't really know any better. I was throwing my shapes everywhere. It's really hard for me to look at my designs I did 9 years ago because they're so messy compared to now. Now I realize my designs look a lot cleaner when I try and fit my shapes into place. Also, here's something that I often forget. You can draw shapes inside of shapes. That is also an option. So for example, you don't have to draw this if you don't want to, but I'm going to show you that you can put a little trigon inside of that trigon that I just drew. The more shapes that you add, the more colorful your bird can be as well, because all these shapes can be a different shade of color. Now I'm just going to take my eraser, clean off that little edge right there. And we're pretty much halfway there already. So all I need to do now is draw a wing for this bird. This bird is not going anywhere unless it's got a wing. So lots of ways to draw a wing. But the first part, I want to draw a round shoulder to to start the wing of hummingbird. So here's my next step. Right from this line, I want you to draw half a circle going up the body and connecting back to the head. Just like this. So that's just a nice round shoulder to start the wing. I'm actually going to show you two different ways to draw a wing. You can draw a nice straight wing, or you can draw a nice kind of curved wing that has some style to it. When I look at this image of how my ancestors here designed this wing goes straight up like a ruler. And each one of these trigons represent a feather. So this is 1 feather, 2 feather, 3 feather, 4 feather, 5 feather, 6 feather. You can add as many feathers as you want to your wing. But I'm going to draw a nice straight wing, and then I'm going to erase it and show you how to draw a different wing. I always want to give you options. So let's say I had a ruler. I don't, by the way. So I'm going to try and draw a straight line. My wing coming out like this. So what I'm going to draw is one pointy feather on top, nice and straight. And then I'm going to add, how many feathers do I want? I could have 3, I could have 4. Maybe I will draw, I'm going to go with 3. 1 feather on top, maybe a medium feather in the middle. And then I have room for a small little feather underneath. I always like to keep mine very simple, so I'm just going with 3 feathers. But there's a nice straight wing. Almost would be passable for a logo. I don't really like straight like a ruler. I like a little bit of style. I like a little bit of flow to my design. But I know this is an option for me if I wanted to do a straight wing. Maybe you want to do a straight wing. Now, I'm going to show you how I would typically draw a wing. Instead of my wing going off to the left nice and straight, I'm going to make my first feather come out at an angle, add some curve to the tip of the feather, just like this. I'm still going to do 3. I'm still going to go with 3 feathers. A large feather on top. I'm going to draw the same shape, just a little bit smaller in size right underneath. So large feather on top, medium pointy feather in the middle, and then still have room for a small feather underneath that one. And then here's where you can get creative. Here's where I see lots of students get creative. Look at all the empty space in the wing. How do you want to decorate that wing? Do you want to use the Coast Salish shapes, or do you want to use your own shapes? That's totally fine if you want to do it like that. Now, you could do little hearts in there, rainbows, flowers, whatever you want. If you're going to follow along with me, I use the Coast Salish shapes. So I'm going to put one of those round crescents that'll take up a good amount of this empty space in the shoulder. That's what I said. I like using this round crescent. Takes up a good amount of space. And, always fits inside of the nice curves of the outline. Now, what do I want to do? Sometimes I don't use Coast Salish shapes. Like, here's an example of what I would do. Put a little heart shape in there. Sometimes you'll see that in my designs to represent, I have love for this animal. I have love for Coast Salish art. Yeah, actually, maybe I'll change that though. I'll stick to the Coast Salish shapes and I'll just start to experiment. Maybe I'll try a variation of a trigon inside of this crescent. Or another idea, I could have a smaller crescent inside of that one and keep making them go smaller and smaller. That might look cool. Maybe I'll add a couple of circles in here. See how that looks. If I don't like it, I'll just erase it, try something else. Another example, putting these shapes inside of other shapes. Here's an example of what you could possibly do. Put a trigon inside of this crescent. So here's a trigon inside of that crescent. If you felt like adding a bit more detail, you could have more color to that wing now. And then at this point, I'm going to create a very simple pattern of the shapes inside of every feather. Do you want 20 crescents in there? Do you want 100 circles? That's up to you as well. I always feel like less is more, so I'm not going to add too many shapes. I do love creating patterns, though. Love creating patterns. And here's where I'm going to talk about the shapes. So I'm going to draw a crescent followed by another crescent. And if you notice, they're moving together in the same direction. And I'm going to try and do that whenever I have more than one shape. And Coast Salish art is all about flow, motion, fluidity. And when you have these shapes moving in the same direction, it does add that sense of motion. Your eye is guided through the design when focused on these shapes moving together. That is one way my ancestors used these shapes, to have a sense of motion through the body. I've also learned that these shapes can represent the skeletal structure or anatomical features of an animal. So let's say I wanted these shapes to represent the bones of my hummingbird. I would color my design whatever color I want, but I would leave these shapes white or blank if I wanted it to represent the bones. I've also learned that having these shapes moving in the same direction throughout the body can represent life's energy, like you're taking in a breath of air and that energy is flowing throughout the body. So that's another thing that these shapes can represent. There's also symbolism in these shapes. These aren't just meaningless shapes. Like, for example, I've learned that the circle represents the circle of life. So circle represents circle of life. The crescent shapes, they kind of resemble the moon, like a sliver of a moon. And the moon goes through different stages and phases leading up to the full moon. So we see the crescents as phases of life that we go through. We all go through different phases and stages of life. Infancy, adolescence, adulthood, and being an elder. Once again, that's connected to the number 4. So a lot of things are connected to the number 4. Almost done here. Almost done. The only thing I have left to do, this bird needs a couple of tail feathers. So here's what I did for tail feathers. I used the crescent shapes. I'm going to have a couple of crescent shapes connected to the pointy end of my pesca, my hummingbird. You could add 4 of them. You could add 5 of them. Totally up to you, my friends. I'm going to keep mine simple once again. Maybe I'll just do 2 of them. And this is always how I'll approach a design. If I have an idea in my mind, I'm going to come to my computer and just start drawing it out. I'm not worried about how perfect it looks right now. This is what I would call a rough draft. If I like my rough draft, my idea, I'm going to go over it again. I'm really going to take my time. I'm going to start to experiment with the colors. There are tools in these programs that will allow me to clean up my work. And in the end, here's what it'll look like, possibly look like. So this is that same hummingbird design. And there's cool things you can do in Photoshop. I've taken my hummingbird and I put it on top of a photograph of a cherry blossom. So I chose that because I was missing back home during springtime. So springtime back home in BC, that's when you would start seeing the cherry blossoms starting to bloom. That's why I chose the cherry blossom. I was missing home. And I even used the same color of the flower to color in my hummingbird. I turned this into a print. A lot of people really seem to enjoy this one. And yeah, it's very pretty to look at. I love how elegant this design turned out to be. If you ever want to check out my website, I'm going to put that at the top of the page right now. salishsundesign.com. Feel free to check that out. You'll see more personal art, projects I've worked on over the years, my merchandise. If you're on Instagram, Instagram is also dedicated to my art. And there's my username, Ovilla79. My full name is Ovilla, but probably only my mother called me that. Everyone just calls me Ovi. So feel free to check that out. And thank you so much for following along with this drawing if you did. And I wish I could see what yours turned out like because I know everyone's got their own style to it. And that's what I really like to see.
I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yeah, I can see it flashing in and out. But I can see the shapes. Okay. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, now I can see it. That is awesome.
That's
really good. That's really good.
I never thought I could draw, but now I kind of feel like I can.
Well, you have a good instructor.
I certainly did.
That's terrific. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I was unsure how it was going to be. Like, it felt like not having an audience and it being a recording, but yeah, I still felt comfortable. Yeah, no, you're amazing. What a great teacher you are. I could just see you in a classroom with a group of children and they're all furiously drawing away. Yeah. I really get the kids engaged by some of those fun designs like I do, like the comic book ones or the video game ones. That's when I really kind of pull them in and they're like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah, I like bringing that energy because the more good energy I put into it, the more fun I know these sessions are. Yeah. No, I can see that. I like working with kids, but I think you have a real knack for it. I think so too. Yeah, I really like doing this. Yeah. Well, it's been a fantastic session with you, workshop with you. I'm glad you put your website up there. We will be putting it up even more. I'm very interested in your blue heron design is absolutely stunning. And I was really fortunate. One time I was in Algonquin Park and we had a bit of we were portaging. And so I'd gone back to the canoe to pick up some more supplies to bring it to the other part. And when I got there, I heard just a whoosh, and I looked up and there's this blue heron and the wings like 10 feet across, like just flying up this little creek right beside where the canoe was. I was so close to it. It was, you practically could feel, I felt it more than saw it at first, Yeah, that's how I felt too. It's quite a spectacle, and it gave me such a unique feeling because it's just not something you see all the time. One thing that I do miss about home is all the eagles. So I think I've been living here in Indiana for over 4 years, and I've only seen an eagle once, which is different than back home where you see them like multiple every day. But there's also cool birds. Like I moved out here and I started to see birds that I typically wouldn't see, such as the red cardinal. And that is my favorite bird out here, and that inspired me to create a red cardinal design. Yeah. So I'm definitely into birds. We don't get many eagles. I saw one once. I was driving, I live by the Ottawa River, and I was driving along, and all of a sudden this eagle kind of came across, but it was like it burst out of the trees and it went to the tree on the other side of the road and it had a fish. Oh, that's cool. That is cool to see. Yeah. I love that. It's the only time though around here. You see them up in my territory more now than you used to. I think they had sort of program to start bringing them back. But yeah, because they were pretty much, I never saw one growing up. We go to the reserve all the time, never saw them, but you're starting to see them more now. Oh, that's a good thing then. Yeah. Yeah. Back on the West Coast, you just see them all the time. That's definitely something I miss. That would be stunning. Well, thank you so much, Ovi, for being with us here today. This was amazing. I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun, and I learned so much. And you've got such a wonderful way of your storytelling the whole time you're speaking, and it's fascinating. I was really engaged, and I just want to repeat that your website is salishsun.com, and your Instagram is Ovila79. And rest assured, I'll be on those looking for some of your work too. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I was so excited for this. So once again, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for drawing with me as well. Drawing is very therapeutic for me. It always puts me in a good mood, and I was definitely feeling that in this session.
Well, Kachimi Gwitch, thank you.
Wasai. Thank you.